Educational considerations of learners who are deaf or hard of hearing. So, one major problem, of course, in this world of deafness or hard of hearing is communication. And there are different approaches on how communication should occur, and we're going to take a look at all of them. So, there are three major ones. The oral approaches breaks down into two parts: the auditory verbal approach and the auditory oral approach. Total communication, and the third one, the biocultural bilingual approach. So we're going to take a look at oral approaches. A first, the auditorial verbal approach. Okay, in this approach, it does not encourage lip reading. It excludes the use of sign language. Oratorio skills are taught through one-on-one teaching, and that's normally done by parents, and they're considered the primary teachers. And children should be placed in a general education classroom as soon as possible. The second part of the oral approach is the auditorial oral approach. And this one's a little bit different because it encourages lip reading. The skills are taught through one-on-one teaching, which is just like part A. Young children should be bathed in spoken language by their parents, and that's the key component on this approach. So back to the outline, we're going to look at the second one now, which is total communication. Total communication is pretty self-explanatory, and it includes anything. So speech, noises, gestures, body language, facial expressions, pointing at words and objects, technology, drawing, and writing. So anything that basically helps a child communicate to someone who is a hearing child or also a deaf or hard of hearing child. And the third part, the biocultural bilingual approach. And this one wants sign language to be the child's first language, and then as their second language, they'll be taught English. And they're going to use the sign language in order to teach English to the child. So if you go in this order, this will allow the children to be fluent in sign language and English. They will be able to communicate to deaf and hearing people. So that's the main goal of this approach. One major advantage we have today is technology. There are multiple technology advances, and they're only getting more elaborate. So, of course, you have hearing aids. When I used to think of hearing aids, I used to just think of tiny little beads in your ear, and it would help grandma or grandpa hear better. But I actually looked up a YouTube video recently, and they become so much more advanced than I have ever thought. They connect to your TV, they connect to your phone. They have like a week span of battery operation in them. So they've become a lot more advanced than just what you used to think of when you think of grandma or grandpa having better hearing with their hearing aids in. Also, captioning on TV, video games, movies, YouTube, and even Zoom. So, two things stuck out to me the most. Video games, because you technically don't think of video games when you think that you need captioning, but you do in case you need to talk to another player, if you need to hear instructions or the next level in a game. And also Zoom. The other day I was just playing around with it because I'm new to it as well, and I noticed that when other students would speak, the closed captioning would actually catch what they're saying, and it would come up on my screen. TV, movies, and YouTube didn't stand out to me as much because I feel that's when you think of closed captioning. And also the internet. The internet keeps the deaf community connected. Although parts of it is genetic, you may not have a relative who is deaf, and you may want to experience and hear from others from the outside world of people who have this disability. And lastly, telephone adaptations. So texting, of course, that's the number one thing you think of because it's written. But I also saw this one, which is VRS. It is Video Replay Service. And I thought that this was super interesting. So a deaf caller would communicate in sign language to this individual who is on a screen, and that person will call the second party that the deaf caller would like to speak to, and the sign language interpreter will speak to the hearing caller and communicate what they want to say, and back and forth. So let's explore what it's like in a, of course, classroom. We're all here, we're all teachers. And there are multiple modifications and accommodations that can be used in a classroom. So the outline of modifications and accommodations, we're going to look at 7 factors: procedural, physical, scheduling, grouping, delivery, education, evaluation, and psychosocial. So the first one, procedural. Written rules and procedures shouldn't be written where the student can see them. So for example, classroom rules. Also, if you have younger students, you should be showing pictures. And any announcements to the class should be given to the student in writing. So you don't want them to miss something if you just forgot to inform them on an instruction and you just announced to the class. The student who is deaf or hard of hearing should have the same opportunity to hear that announcement, which is why a simple post-it note or being written on the board, anything like that would help the child. Physical. Sit the students in a position where they can take advantage of all visual cues. So you might have posters around the classroom and just any other visual aspect that might help the student. So they maybe should be sitting in the middle if your classroom is structured that way. Scheduling. Provide visual time reminders for students during class so they know how much time is available for a specific task. So I think that this helps all students, hard of hearing or not hard of hearing. I always have a timer in my classroom, and it keeps the students on task, and each student knows where they are at that specific time. Grouping. Provide a buddy system or support system. You can provide a buddy to that specific child who has a hearing impairment, and that can be their one person to always go to if they have a question or if they need help with something, and they shouldn't get in trouble if they get out of their seat and have to go communicate with that child. It should just be a buddy system that they're there for them. Delivery. Do not speak facing your back to the students. Sometimes teachers have a habit of kind of talking to the board if they're explaining something, but for a student who does not have difficulty in hearing, they might be able to follow along, but a student who might be focusing on lip reading, they're going to get lost because now you're just pointing to things and you're not really instructing them. And pre-teach important vocabularies and concepts. So something that might be difficult for the entire class, and now you have to actually put extra focus on the child who has a hearing disability, that might be difficult for you and the entire class. So it's important to pre-teach any hard concepts or vocabulary that might come into play. And evaluation. Allow written or drawn responses to serve as an alternative to oral presentations. So this, I believe, is an example of just a child introducing themselves, and you might do that on the first day of school or the first week of school, but instead of that child feeling uncomfortable to do that or just silencing them, it's important that you give them the opportunity to maybe make a poster or write a paragraph or an essay depending on their age. If available, have tests given by specialists and tests translated into sign language. So this might be difficult, but depending on your school, you may have access to this. And lastly, psychosocial. Increase frequency of descriptive praise. So a child that's in your class that is able to hear, you might be able to just simply say good job or keep going, you're doing amazing. But a simple sticker, if you walk around, just put that on their paper. That's just something saying that they're doing a good job. Or you can even do the sign language hand clap and maybe incorporate that in your entire classroom so they feel included. And structure activities for deaf and hearing students so that they can work together. So I think that this is also important because you don't want that buddy system just become the only buddy that that child feels comfortable talking to. You want to incorporate group activities and for everyone to be working together, whether they are hearing child or they're deaf.